Towards the end of the 1950s, it seemed everyone in Hollywood was trying their hand at making an alien invasion movie. Perhaps the most infamous example of this was a film written, produced and directed by Edward D. Wood Jr., aka Ed Wood. Ed Wood had previously made a low-budget docudrama about cross-dressing called Glenn or Glenda. This movie was incredibly poorly received and even at the time was dubbed one of the worst movies ever made. But Ed Wood didn't let this dishearten him. With the help of a group of close friends and collaborators, including Swedish wrestler Tor Johnson, late-night TV host Vampira, TV psychic The Amazing Criswell, and, most importantly, horror veteran Bela Lugosi, Ed Wood went on to make another film. The film that, in his words, people would remember him by. An epic sci-fi horror adventure movie with aliens, vampires, action, romance, even some political commentary. What could possibly go wrong?
Can your heart stand the shocking facts about grave robbers from outer space?
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of alien horror as we discuss Ed Wood's infamous turkey, Plan 9 from Outer Space. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Munter, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 7th series, exploring the evolution of alien, cosmic, and sci-fi horror, and this is part 5. As that intro suggested, this week we are going to be looking at the film often regarded as the worst movie ever made. We'll see about that. Plan 9 from Outer Space. Can't wait to get into this. This will be a spoilerific review. Give the film a watch before listening to our discussion, because come on, everyone has got to watch Plan 9 from Outer Space at least once in their life. Go away, give it a little watch. I don't think you'll regret it. It's a hell of a lot of fun. Not only that, in the second half of this discussion, we are going to be wrapping up sort of American sci-fi 50s alien movies. Kevin Lyons is going to be dropping in, and he's going to be giving us a list of alien also-rans, some additional sci-fi horror recommendations from this era that you could check out. Movies that, sadly, we didn't have time to discuss in depth, but ones that we would still love to recommend spoiler-free. So stay tuned for that later on in this episode. But first of all, let's get into Plan 9 from Outer Space. Joining me to discuss these movies, I've got 2 brand new guests with me. I've been a fan of their podcast for a very, very long time, but it's their first time here on the evolution of horror, and I thought there is no better film for these guys to make their debut appearance on EOH than Plan 9 from Outer Space. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast Mitch and Andy, co-hosts of Strong Language and Violent Scenes. Hello, Mitch and Andy.
Hey. Hello, Mike.
Hello, guys. It's such a pleasure to finally have you both on. Let me start off by asking you. Now, I reckon we've probably got quite a big cross-section of listeners that are also familiar with your podcast. But for anyone out there listening that doesn't know anything about Strong Language and Violent Scenes, Andy, tell us a little bit about the podcast and sort of how it came about.
Yeah, we started doing this in 2018. Mitch had moved down from Peterhead to Glasgow, and he didn't really know a massive amount of people. And the people he knew, he had this kind of horror crossover with from going to festivals and stuff. So people like myself, and I guess more than anything, to kind of make sure he was getting like a proper dinner in his belly. Like, we would invite him over for dinner, and we would inevitably sink a couple of bottles of wine and wind up watching a film. And it was always my choice, so it was always something mad, like usually from the kind of 80s. And we just found ourselves sitting talking shit about films, and then we decided what the world needs is to listen to us doing this. So yeah, we decided we were just we would do what everyone else was doing and start a podcast where we kind of force that opinion on people.
It's so great, and luckily, because we all have that thought, right, where we all go, do you know what, people need to listen to me talk about films, but few of them actually work, and you guys are so funny and so entertaining that it's such a joy to listen to.
Thanks.
Mitch, tell me a little bit. I want to ask you both about your kind of relationship with the horror genre in general. And I know, Mitch, from listening to your podcast, you often say, like, this is a first-time watch for me. I've never seen this before. Are you sort of fairly sort of recent newcomer to the horror genre?
I kind of describe myself as a newcomer. I guess it's kind of medium term now, but I would say definitely newer than a lot of people are. Whereas, so I'm 34 now, and I would say that I started getting into horror, even kind of like in a kind of casual, tangential way, probably around about like 2007. And I remember that the thing that I did genuinely, as a kind of entry point, was I remember sitting at home with my twin sister and her boyfriend, and an advert for Paranormal Activity, the trailer for Paranormal Activity came on the TV. And he'd expressed a passing interest in seeing it, and I thought that she was just a little bit too disparaging about that. So purely for the sake of him winning the argument, I was like, I'll go see that with you. And genuinely, it just kind of widened out from there. But I would say that kind of like I dove a bit deeper from about 2013 onwards, when I started to go into Fright Fest and started going to celluloid screams and stuff like that. Getting out, seeing like what existed beyond the multiplex, I guess, and kind of meeting people and understanding a little bit more about the community and all those kinds of things. But because of that, like, I mean, so that's me saying that I'm 34 and I got into it when I was like 22. So my knowledge is riddled with holes, and that's kind of very much the position I occupy on the podcast, like you said, where like Andy has this kind of like encyclopedic scholarly knowledge of horror, and a lot of the time I'm kind of blundering in, watching things for the first time, and kind of almost being kind of willfully blind to things, because I know that it's kind of fun to come at it from those two different angles. Definitely. But yeah, so I would say like a latecomer, and especially to the kind of like kind of digging in on a more like microscopic indie kind of level, I would say last 10 years or so.
Do you guys have, I mean, on this podcast, obviously, we sort of delve into particular subgenres and that kind of thing. Mitch, would you say that you have a particular favourite kind of area of horror that you would gravitate towards?
The things that I tend to respond the best to are things that kind of generally give off a sort of almost indie drama vibe and casually introduce a horror element.
Yeah. Like sort of backdoor horrors kind of thing.
Yeah. It's like it like it's not until it is.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And I mean, like, I guess we'll talk about favorites a little bit later, but like, I guess that the things that I'm thinking about are stuff like Raw.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
And things like that. Where like I think that like where you take something that's like a fundamentally human story and casually introduce an element like that. I don't necessarily know if there's a word for that, but those are the things that I respond to the best, I would say.
Andy, what about you? Do you have like a favourite subgenre?
Oh yeah. That comes as no surprise to anyone, I'm sure. I'm a body horror guy.
Yeah.
If it's slimy and gungy and there's pus everywhere, then it's absolutely for me. I've subjected Mitch to some horrible stuff.
Yeah.
And most of which he doesn't like, to be quite frank.
Yeah, I am not good with body horror. Like, I actually really enjoy it, but it's the stuff that still affects me the most.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what are your thoughts on the subgenre that we're covering this series? Sort of alien horror, cosmic horror, sci-fi horror, aliens from outer space, UFOs, that kind of stuff. Mitch, are you a fan of this kind of subgenre?
Honestly, broadly, no. Like,
Fine. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I should preempt this out of the gate, because I understand that obviously what you do is like considerably more academic and a lot more theological than what we do, or theoretical, should I say? But like, yeah, I'm coming into this with not a massive amount of knowledge about the subgenre. But what I would say is like, I guess the sci-fi films I respond to, I guess it kind of ties into what I was saying before. Like the things that I like are kind of like Another Earth.
Ooh.
District 9, I guess.
Love District 9. What a film.
Things like that. But again, it's like, so I do like it. I would say that like I've got a reasonably high threshold for it. It's just that I think if I was sitting by myself with a free evening, it's not necessarily something I would actively seek out.
Andy, what about you? What are your thoughts on this area of horror?
Again, it's not something I massively gravitate towards, but it's something that I have spent a reasonable amount of time kind of watching. Like there was a period where I went through like I guess kind of old like Roger Corman stuff from the 50s, a lot of sci-fi monster flicks like Attack of the Crab People, and a lot of other films that I'm sure we'll kind of touch on briefly in here, like Forbidden Planet, The Blob, Thing from Another World, When Worlds Collide and stuff like that, kind of broadly all from this kind of era. So yeah, I mean, for me, if I'm going to watch anything with aliens, I tend to gravitate towards Alien and Aliens. and Predator 2 because it's fucking awesome.
What I will say, Mike, as well was if you were going to draft this in for any one film for this, you pick the right one.
I'd say so.
I know. I can't. I mean, I thought of you guys instantly, to be honest, when I put this film in. So there you go. Let's get into it. Let's begin talking then about Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Wow.
Greetings, my friend. We are all interested in the future, for that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives. And remember, my friend, future events such as these will affect you in the future. You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here. And now, for the first time, we are bringing to you the full story of what happened on that fateful day. We are giving you all the evidence, based only on the secret testimony of the miserable souls who survived this terrifying ordeal. The incidents, the places. My friend, we cannot keep this a secret any longer. Let us punish the guilty. Let us reward the innocent. My friend, can your heart stand the shocking facts about grave robbers from outer space?
I'm going to ask you guys to give me, or one of you guys, who shall I ask to do the plot synopsis? Mitch, aren't you really good at doing short, snappy plot synopses? I think that's like your specialism. I even saw you summarise the whole of the Saw franchise in like 30 seconds online the other day.
Yeah, that was amazing. Well done.
That was amazing. So I'm going to ask you to give us your best little brief plot synopsis of Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Okay, I will do my best. So I would say that Criswell, host of Criswell Predicts, casts himself against type, does no predicting, and instead revisits the fateful day of an alien invasion in America. So the aliens, upon reviewing their options, resort to Plan 9, which involves reanimating the Earth's dead. Among them is Ghoulman, played by Bela Lugosi.
Yes.
What follows is a deep dive into the administrative red tape on both the human and alien sides of this invasion, distinguishable only by fancy curtains and different outfits.
Fantastic.
Fair.
Excellent job. Andy, let me come to you. What do you think of Plan 9 from Outer Space, first of all? And like, how familiar with it were you before this week?
I was very familiar with it, actually. It's something that I've watched a fair amount. I got really into Ed Wood after seeing Ed Wood, the Tim Burton film, and I kind of went back and watched a bunch of stuff, Glenard Glenda, Bride of the Monster, things like that. So I spent a decent amount of time watching his stuff and kind of reading his books later on, which is a great way to spend your time, to be honest. Yeah, so I've seen it loads, and I quite like it. I mean, it's obviously got this reputation as being one of the worst films ever made. I don't necessarily think that's true. I think we've covered worst films on our podcast. And there's a weird, lovely charm to it, and I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that it is this kind of singular vision of a director who kind of lacked the talent and the budget and the experience, I suppose, to kind of pull off a film of this scale. So he's done the best with the kind of resources available to him, and this is the result, and I think it's quite lovely for that.
Yeah. Mitch, what about you? Were you a sort of newcomer to this film? How familiar with it were you?
Mike, I'm going to shock you here. It was the first watch for me.
Hey!
However, I had seen Ed Wood.
Yes.
And a lot of what I know about Ed Wood, in all honesty, is kind of born out of the things that I learned watching that film. Yeah, it was a first watch for me. I was kind of a little bit blindsided by it, to be honest. I think that, like, because the only things that I really knew about the story of this film and the production of it was from that film.
Yeah.
I expected it to be more overtly silly, and I understand that it is kind of plenty overtly silly, but I expected to feel more extremely about it in either direction.
Yeah.
And I'm not certain that I did. It feels kind of meandering. Like, it feels a lot like, for a film that has a runtime of like 79 minutes, it feels like a lot of it is padding. There's a lot of shambling around in that one graveyard.
There really is. And
a lot of kind of like fairly circuitous conversations speculating about things. And like a lot of that stuff does feel kind of like treading water. It's surprising to me how much of a kind of police procedural feel the second act has.
Oh, absolutely. I think, there is a kind of rudderless quality to it, and I think that does play back into the fact that, again, it's this one man's vision. He sees himself as this auteur, but doesn't really have the chops to kind of pull it off. So what you have here is just this kind of hodgepodge of ideas and kind of disconnected scenes, and it hangs together just barely, but it is a bit all over the map.
Yeah, it was dubbed as, the worst film ever made by the Golden Turkey Awards in 1980. I mean, Mitch, you guys have watched some shit films together on your podcast, I know. Is that fair? Is Plan 9 from Outer Space the worst movie ever made?
Not even close, for me. Not even close. Obviously, it's full of hokey dialogue, hokier special effects, weirdly choppy editing, all that kind of stuff. But I think that films that inspire extreme reactions in either direction are almost never the worst films ever made.
Yes. Yeah.
For me, it's like the 4.5 out of 10 films that are the problem.
Yes.
The competently made, practically useless films are the films that are a problem. At least you can feel the heart to this, I think. It's I don't feel like anybody that was involved in this didn't give it any less than 100%. The films where you feel like demonstrably the people that were involved didn't give a shit are the problem. They're the real kind of offensive ones. The ones that inspire no reaction are worse. I think that everything about this is do I think it's competently made? No. But do I believe that everyone that was involved in it genuinely believed they were making something good, or everybody was kind of throwing everything into it? Absolutely yes. And I think that the heart is enough to elevate it past it being the worst film ever. You can see the passion in every second of it, even the stuff that I don't respond to. Not in the top 10, not in the top 20, not in the top 50 worst films I've ever seen.
I know what you mean though, Mitch, about I think coming into it with those expectations, because it has that reputation, right, as being the worst movie ever made. I think you expect maybe to find it. I think I expected to this was the second time I think I'd ever seen it, and it had been a long time since I saw it the first time. I kind of expected to laugh at it more than I did, and after the initial maybe first 30 minutes when you're laughing at how naff it is, it then does kind of meander and it goes on a bit, doesn't it? And it's like you say, just a lot of people talking in sort of static situations and sort of filling time.
It's one of those things that I kind of feel like is an idea that had no business ever being a feature, and and I don't know, I think it's kind of strange. Once it settled into a tone, and once I settled into the tone of it, I actually didn't find it that ridiculous. Once it set its stall out, I was like, okay, fine. And after I'd gotten kind of on that train, there wasn't really that much stuff that upset me either way.
Yeah.
And I wasn't prepared for that. I was ready to, I was ready for something that was going to be more ridiculous, more bombastic. And I was surprised by how kind of almost ponderous it was every now and again.
Yeah, I'd sooner watch Plan 9 any day than Verotica again. There's way worse films out there that are just an absolute waste of your time. I don't think this is a waste of time. I think it's an interesting little time capsule and a glimpse into somebody's mind.
I agree, and maybe it's also all three of us, by the sounds of it, came to this film with the prior knowledge of the film Ed Wood, which is such a lovely, charming film, right? I think it's Tim Burton's best film. By a long shot.
You might be right.
Mine too.
I think it's his most competent film that he's ever. I think he's made some pretty, actually, maybe worse movies than Plan 9, to be honest. Some of his really bland studio stuff from the last 20 years. But
I'm looking at you, Big Eyes.
Yeah, fuck off, Big Eyes, and Alice in Wonderland, and basically everything he did with Johnny Depp post this movie. But anyway, the Plan 9 is made with so much love, I think, and maybe with the knowledge of Ed Wood and that kind of weird sort of ragtag group of misfits that get together and make a film. I'm a sucker for stories like that, One Cut of the Dead, Bowfinger, anything like that where people get together and have a laugh making a shit film. That's my own favourite little niche subgenre,
See, I feel like I almost benefited from watching films like that first, then watching this. I'd seen One Cut of the Dead, I'd seen Ed Wood, I'd seen Attack of the Bat Monsters and stuff like that before I'd watched this. So I already those films, and obviously fictional or otherwise, it's it gives you an understanding of how much passion goes into any film and getting anything over the line.
Yeah.
So it's I think that my disposition is always kind of positioned away from being snarky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Stuff, because I think that those films give you an understanding of everything that goes into anything, good or bad, that
Yeah.
makes it to a cinema, makes it to a festival, makes it over the line. So yeah, I think that's definitely something. I think that, like, speaking as somebody who's a little bit more of a newcomer and basically did all of this in reverse, was kind of something that occurred to me while I was watching this. But I was like, I would never objectively be like, this is terrible, because I'd seen films that paid homage to this kind of filmmaking before I saw the stuff it was paying homage to.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I think in a way it makes a really good double bill to do Ed Wood followed by Plan 9 from Outer Space, in a way. Or vice versa. I don't know which way round would be better, actually. But
I would actually say Bride of the Monster, that Ed Wood is more kind of focused on the making of Bride of the Monster. So
Yeah.
that's your double bill there. Plan 9's just a bonus.
Tell us a little bit about Ed. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people know and have seen the film, Andy, but, like, tell us a little bit about Ed Wood then, because have you like checked out some of his other movies as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much threw myself into everything that was mentioned in the film Ed Wood, starting with Glen or Glenda, which, I mean, he came to Hollywood in like the 40s. I think, like everybody else, he was kind of chasing a dream. He was like this avowed film fan who just desperately wanted to do something in films, and I think he did a lot of kind of odd jobs, and then gets this job to direct this feature based on the life of Christine Jorgensen, who was the first widely known transgender woman in the US. So this, like, really important and kind of timely kind of people story, like personal story, lands in his lap, and what he does with it is shoots it in 4 days. Like, it's got 14 minutes of stock footage in it. It's got Bela Lugosi shouting at the camera, and it's actually, more than anything, a bit of a vanity project, which really was just a vehicle for Ed acting under the name Daniel Davis to kind of discuss his own predilection for cross-dressing. So I mean, there's stuff later on in the film that's kind of more to do with the gender reassignment stuff, and that's kind of part 2 of Glen or Glenda. It's Alan or Anne. And it's actually, I mean, it's a bit of a mess, but that's to be expected. But it's actually quite a progressive / transgressive film, like, and I think it's worth a watch, for sure. And then he went on he did a couple of things in between, like a Jailbait. And then went on to Bride of the Monster, which, if you've seen Ed Wood, you know enough about Bride of the Monster. In this one, Bela Lugosi is this mad scientist trying to create an army of supermen, which I actually prefer to Plan 9, to be honest. But there's a sequel to Bride of the Monster as well, which came out after Plan 9, called Night of the Ghouls, but I haven't seen.
You haven't checked that one out yet?
No. Officer Kelton from Plan 9 from Outer Space, he appears in both Bride of the Monster and Night of the Ghouls, so they're kind of referred to as the Kelton trilogy.
Nice,
which I think is quite sweet for such a small bumbling policeman character.
I think that's it, right? The fact that he reuses a lot of the same people, and there's this idea that he's just like, it reminds me a bit of John Waters movies too. There's that idea that, like, it's just like a bunch of kind of misfits and weirdos getting together to make these films. And Mitch, like, that is exactly what we as horror fans love and gravitate towards, right? I mean, we've all seen a lot of kind of weird and wonderful things at Fright Fest these last 10 years, right? Made by the same people that come back and they reuse the same actors, and it almost becomes like this sort of extended family in the horror world, doesn't it? With things like that, you know?
Yeah.
So Bela Lugosi, you mentioned Bela Lugosi. He was in all of Ed Wood's films, right? Up until this point, is that right? Or he was in sort of the major features, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was in Glen or Glenda. He wasn't in the couple of little things that happened in, like, Jailbait. He's not in Jailbait. And then he's back for Bride of the Monster.
Yeah.
He's got quite a big role in there. And then obviously he passed away before anything was filmed for Plan 9, but Ed had kind of speculatively shot a bunch of footage of him, which is all I think all of it turns up in Plan 9. So credit in Bela Lugosi's fine, but in actual fact, when the footage was getting shot, he had no idea what it was going to be for, and he certainly had no idea that it would be for this film. So
I know he just sort of wanders into a graveyard and out again, and then he wanders outside a house, smells a flower, and disappears again. Basically, doesn't he? That's pretty much it.
It's quite bittersweet and quite sad, actually, because you're seeing a man, a kind of troubled man by this point, kind of coming towards the end of his life, and just. He's really desperately trying to cling on to who he was, like, kind of 20 odd years before when he was Dracula. And everyone knew him as Dracula. And here he's just, he's still dressing as Dracula, but it's just that there's just something so sad and hollow about his appearance in here that it's quite...
Yeah, it's kind of heartbreaking, isn't it? Yeah. And I think especially, again, I'm basing a lot of my knowledge here from Tim Burton's Ed Wood. But of course, I think we all know anyway that Bela Lugosi, who was this, pretty much the biggest star in horror in the 1930s, obviously one of the original horror stars, the fact that he played Dracula and that he still is the man we think of when we think of Dracula so often, we think of that accent and all this. And the way that his career kind of declined after the 1930s, after Dracula. And, there is this feeling by the time, the 1950s roll around, and he mentions this in Ed Wood, right, that he's like, well, horror is just all giant bugs and aliens now. There's nobody gives two fucks for Bella. And there is this kind of running joke throughout the film where all of the studio executives and producers go, Bela Lugosi, isn't he dead? And he's like, no one even knows he's still around anymore by this point. But Ed Wood had this actually really kind of sweet relationship with him where he kind of really respected Bella really respected him as a filmmaker, and I think in Bella's final few years they loved working together, didn't they? And like you say, Andy, he shot a few kind of sweet moments with Bella just sort of around and outside his house, and that footage is what gets put into this movie, Plan 9 from Outer Space. Mitch, what did you think of Bela Lugosi's kind of role in this film? Did you, because again, not knowing necessarily the backstory, they plaster Bela Lugosi's name all over the posters like he's starring in it, don't they? But what did you think of Bella in this film?
Yeah, I guess, my answer to this is kind of middling, I suppose, because I understood the nature of how the footage of him made it into it.
Yeah.
Because I'd seen Ed Wood.
Yeah.
And I don't want, I really don't want to shackle too much of my opinions of this to what I know about it from Ed Wood.
I know, it's really difficult to not to do that, though, because I'm doing the same thing, but yeah.
Because I don't want to use it as too heavy a reference point, because I don't want to just be like, I don't want to shackle everything to the historical accuracy of that film. But but I remember thinking that, obviously, in that film, you have got kind of Martin Landau having that conversation about... Sorry?
Amazing, by the way.
Absolutely incredible, yeah. But having that conversation in the car right after they do this, about him kind of clinging to relevance.
Yeah.
And stuff, and I think that and I remember thinking that was kind of incredibly sad in the film, and it was funny. It was only really when I sat down to watch this again, or to watch this for the first time, that I realised how much of it was tied to Ed Wood, because I hadn't seen Ed Wood in quite a while, but it kind of brought it all kind of flooding back to me, and it's like I think Bela Lugosi, I think that considering he largely didn't know what he was in,
yeah,
he's incredibly easy to watch in this, and I think that and I don't feel like any of the stuff, especially like we're talking about when he's outside the house smelling the roses, the kind of morning ghoul man stuff at the start.
Sure.
Like none of it feels like a sore thumb thematically or tonally or visually or anything. Like I think it's all fine. I think that he's really watchable in it, but it was strange to think that knowing what we know.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, and like, bless them, they don't do a very good job with Bella's double, do they, Andy? You've got this other guy who, was he some sort of chiropractor or something?
Yeah, he was Kathy Wood's chiropractor, Tom Mason, who was considerably taller than Bela Lugosi, and they just hide his face under a cape for his entire appearance. It's really quite remarkable, actually. That takes balls.
He's in it so much more than Bella is, right? And he just walks around holding his cape around his face through the entire time. And these kind of very awkward sort of chase scenes that happen with him throughout as well. Entirely different
You
bills.
say chase, Mike. Yeah. You say chase, but there's no chase. No one's moving with any kind of urgency.
The stakes could not be lower.
No. I know. Let me ask you about the portrayal of the aliens. We've talked
Sure.
about three classics so far this series before this episode. We've talked about War of the Worlds, which have got those very kind of classic, kind of creepy little aliens with long fingers and three glowing eyes, and they're very exactly what you'd think of as stereotypical aliens. Then we talked about Invasion. Yeah, go on.
The Take Me to Your Leader brand.
Yeah, exactly. The Take Me to Your Leader brand. Then we talked about Invasion of the Body Snatchers snatchers. So the pod people, they kind of look and sound like us, but they're freaky, pod things. And then we talked about the blob, which is an entirely different thing altogether, obviously. It's just big gelatinous mass. What have we got here? Mitch, what did you think of these particular aliens from outer space?
So early on, I had no problem with it, exterior-wise. Like, every time I saw a flying saucer in this, I, smiled, I chuckled to myself. I found suitably endearing. I was like, fine, this is nonsense, but it's a train I'm ready to commit to getting on. Yeah, absolutely fine. And it's especially as well, when you've got Criswell in narration talking about this kind of blind hysteria. And, you see this montage of all the military getting mobilized and stuff like that. I was like, again, nonsense, here for it.
Yes.
Fine.
Yes.
100%. The minute that we actually saw the aliens and I realized that they were differently dressed humans who walked slightly robotically, I was like, less on board with this.
So brilliant. It's so ridiculously camp. The first time you see them and they do their little, tap of their shoulder and everything. Right. Andy, what did you think of these guys?
Again, it's kind of echo what Mitch said. Very much just regular middle-aged humans in shiny costumes. Bunny Breckenridge, who plays the ruler of the aliens, he obviously, his costume's just sourced from some medieval film because he's wearing this tabard that's just got a halberd on it. Just I don't see that coming from space. That doesn't seem intergalactic enough to me.
It's so good. But I actually genuinely quite enjoyed all of the scenes with the quote-unquote aliens in the spaceship. I think some of the conversations that were had there were more interesting than the cop stuff that was going on down on Earth, you know?
I also think spaceship's an interesting thing to say because it's a room with a desk and a bedside chest of drawers.
Yeah. I think it's just funny that also every time it cut back to the aliens, I had to remind myself that it was the aliens that I was looking at.
Yeah. And we've got a weird sort of mix of genres here because they're aliens, but they sort of are vampires, right? I mean, obviously we've got Bela Lugosi or zombies. I mean, we've got people coming out of graves and kind of stumbling around with their arms out. Andy, I guess this is very much a sort of classic 30s horror as much as it is a 50s horror in a way, right?
I would say so, yeah. I don't think Edward knew entirely what he wanted to do here. I think he liked the idea of reanimating the dead, but he also wanted to have Bela Lugosi in there.
Yeah.
And for his money, getting Bela Lugosi in there means he has to be playing this super gothic vampire. Yeah. So that's kind of what happens here. But then you've also, on the other side, you've got what are essentially... You have a very clear, discernible zombie with Tor Johnson's Inspector Clay. And then you have Vampira in here. Essentially, by the way, I think Vampira's amazing in this, and she doesn't utter a word.
Yes.
And she is just playing Vampira. She refused to do any dialogue because the stuff that was written for her was terrible.
Yes.
So she demanded to be mute.
I only know about Vampira from Edward. This is going to be a recurring theme. But
it's so vindicating that everybody else is doing this.
Yeah. It's basically instead of reading about the film or watching a documentary, I just rewatched Edward. But she was essentially she was essentially Elvira, right?
I believe she sued Elvira, accused her of trying to steal her stick.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's not surprising, actually, when you look at them, you're like, oh my God. I mean, Elvira definitely just ripped off Vampira, right? I mean, even the name. But yeah. It's
absolutely, she did.
What did you think of Mitch, her, and this other guy? What's his name? Tor Johnson. Who was like a wrestler, right? I don't think was even an actor, but he was massive and super strong, and they just sort of got those two. They do a lot of the grunt work through this film, right? As these kind of ghouls that wander about. What did you think of these two, Mitch?
Is this Vampira and
Inspector Clay?
Inspector Clay, that's it. Yeah.
So Vampira, I agree. Again, just kind of echoing what Andy said. I think for all that she's given to do, it's great. It does the job. I think it's really funny early on when you see that encounter with her and the two guys that are kind of sitting kind of graveside at the funeral.
Yeah.
Yep.
When one of those things was obviously shot during the daytime and the other was at night.
Oh, it does that often. It jumps from day to night in the same scene.
But I would say that the emergence of Clay from the grave the first time they use it is potentially my favourite moment in the film.
It's genuinely good. I think I love that.
I think it's really good. Yeah, I think it's really fun. I mean, they absolutely they rinse it to an inch of its life. Yeah. But yeah, I like it's really fun. It's probably the most effective individual thing in there. I think that he is one of the kind of like most prominent strings to the bow in this.
I think Todd Johnson does his best work actually when he's a dialogueless ghoul, because he struggles quite a lot with his dialogue and he's Swedish, so it's like not his native tongue, so he seems to have quite a hard time wrapping his tongue around the madness that Ed Wood gets him to say.
Yeah.
Minutes later, the police, led by Inspector Daniel Clay, arrived at the scene.
Who found them?
The man and girl.
Medical examiner been around yet?
Just left. The morgue wagon ought to be along most any time.
You get their statement?
Yeah, much as we could. They're pretty scared.
Finding a mess like this ought to make anyone frightened.
And that doesn't do a massive amount of favours for those scenes that are kind of already a little bit kind of lumbery and a little bit talky. Like that scene where everyone talks about the correct way to approach a grave and then how to light the grave, and then somebody does it and then he reads it aloud and stuff like that. That scene occupies more than 5% of the runtime of this entire film. Yeah. And I think that like him kind of gurning his way through stuff like that doesn't help. So I totally agree. I think like he works much better as a presence than an actor.
He does. And I do think that Ed Wood, for all of his kind of flaws as a filmmaker, I think he knows that. Like, it feels like he's sort of doing the best with what he has, in a way, which is like no money and a few kind of weirdos to help him make this film. And you feel like he gets that. Like, I actually think that despite the fact that he's known for making these terrible films, I think he kind of understands the language of film and how to put stuff together in a way, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. He didn't really have much. This film was largely funded by a local Baptist church.
Yes.
He hired a bunch of people that he met in nightclubs and, like you said, weirdos, like people like Criswell, people like Bunny Breckenridge were people that he was meeting at clubs and just roped them into doing it. A lot of other people were friends of friends and producers' friends and producers themselves and producers' wives. He just roped together just this crazy bunch of people and did the best with what he had and the tools available to him. And a lot of it was just built on the day, and everything else was just kind of done on a wing and a prayer, really, more than anything.
It's insane. I mean, Andy, we mentioned Criswell, sorry. Remind us who he was, because he kind of introduces the film, right? And he was some sort of like television star, psychic person?
Yeah. He actually shared a soundstage with Vampira. They did their stuff on the same soundstage, so they already kind of knew each other. Criswell, I think, is one of the more interesting characters, like, in here, and I say characters as it refers to Criswell himself, not as the narrator, because I guess he's essentially playing himself though. But he was like, you're right, he was this notoriously kind of inaccurate psychic that people kind of put a lot of stock in. Like, he was Mae West's personal psychic, and he was kind of never really close to the mark with his predictions. He predicted mass cannibalism in the end of the world in August 1999, which didn't happen, unfortunately.
Sad.
My favourite inaccurate prediction of his was he once predicted that a ray from space would hit Colorado and cause everything made of metal to take on the qualities of rubber, causing carnage at amusement parks.
Oh my God.
Like, that was his worry. Not bridges, not planes, not cars. Like
roller coasters.
Roller coasters. The damage to roller coasters will be irreparable.
Inconceivable.
That would be devastating, to be fair.
Yeah, but I mean, this was his thing. Like, he was well known for it, and a lot of people gave a lot of credence to the stuff that he said.
Do you think, Mitch, I may be about to give this film too much credit, but I'm going to talk about this like conversation they have at the end. Now, a lot of the films we've talked about so far have been in response to fear of communism, fear of the atomic bomb, like the worry that the atomic bomb is going to destroy humanity and all this. Do you think that Ed Wood was going for anything like that with his film, Mitch, in your opinion? Like that whole conversation they have at the end about hydrogen bombs and the atom bomb and all of that kind of stuff?
I feel like that might be generous. I think that like,
Come on.
it's very watchable. It's very enjoyable, but it does feel like it gives off a strong vibe of someone who has written themselves into a corner and will now bludgeon you to death with theology.
I don't know if I necessarily agree. I mean, the day the Earth stood still does something kind of similar, and as a plot device, it's been used loads since. I think that what he's done is he has kind of done exactly the same thing that films like Godzilla did, where it's the moral of the film is this kind of warning against humanity's constant proliferation of weapons and I guess our fundamental incomprehension of the power that we wield. And they go on to talk about solarinite, this sun-based energy source that he believes will be the downfall of humanity and the undoing of the universe. I think he's making a very important point, and it's a point that every film, like you say, Mike, at this time was making, whether it was atomic weapons, whether it was the kind of slow rise of nuclear power, and like this was a time when every advert like on the TV would be talking about microwaves and how in the next couple of years everything's going to be powered by nuclear power and nuclear energy is going to be the saviour of us all. It's this remarkable clean energy. I think he very much knew what he was doing with what he wanted to say here, but again, just doesn't necessarily deliver it in the most coherent way.
Andy's answer is better than mine. Use Andy's.
I'm using them both.
Why is it so important that you want to contact the governments of our Earth?
Because of death. Because all you of Earth are idiots.
Now, you just hold on, Buster.
No, you hold on. First was your firecracker, a harmless explosive. Then your hand grenade. They began to kill your own people a few at a time. Then the bomb. Then a larger bomb. Many people are killed at one time. Then your scientists stumbled upon the atom bomb. Split the atom. Then the hydrogen bomb, where you actually explode the air itself. Now you can brings the total destruction of the entire universe served by our sun. The only explosion left is the solarinite.
You know, those aliens are kind of in some ways portrayed as sort of smarter and maybe more civilized than us, right? Or at least than these Americans that just want to like blow shit up. And I think that is, again, like maybe I'm being very generous here, but a lot of the films we've discussed so far this series have been very kind of cut and dry. America good, aliens bad.
Yeah.
We will blow up anything and that doesn't look like us and live happily ever after. And actually, Ed Wood is doing something a little bit different here by he's kind of saying like maybe we as humans are in the wrong here and we could learn something, you know. Again, you know, maybe I'm giving it too much credit, but I kind of liked that about it.
I think that this film is potentially not as subversive as you're giving it credit for, but I also think that the extreme is also wrong.
Yeah.
I think that the answer probably lies somewhere in between. I don't think that you're entirely wrong with that assertion, personally.
Yeah. So, you know, it's got this kind of reputation. I guess I want to wrap up with just asking you guys, like, is this film something that you think... I mean, we all watched it presumably kind of on our own in our living room, right? But, like, Mitch, do you think that the reason this film stands the test of time, like, is... Do you think people would enjoy this at, like, a late-night screening somewhere like Fright Fest, somewhere like the Prince Charles Cinema? Is this movie kind of designed for that kind of screening, do you think?
I think that, I think that if there is a way for this to exist and find an audience now, it is that way. Mm-hmm. It's not near the top of the list of things I would choose for that. I think that, like, if you were doing it, it's kind of like, if you could imagine kind of like an all-nighter and you program this at 3 a.m, I think that at 3:45 people will be flagging. Like, I think that, like, you know, like, they're like, I think that, like, there's more narrative water treading in this than I expected there to be. I don't know if it necessarily functions as a so bad it's good film in the way that people tend to talk about it. I think that there's a circuitousness to the narrative in the middle in a way that I think that, like, the fun element of it kind of derails a little bit. I think that people should see it. I think that people should definitely, like, because the reason that I knew this existed was because of the so bad it's good kind of narrative, and I think that people should see it just to kind of understand where in the conversation that sits. I'm not sure what value there is to revisiting it beyond that.
Yeah, Andy, what do you think? I mean, like, how do you think this film ended up with this legacy that it's got?
I mean, I think that this film, if you want to treat it as like this kind of so bad it's good thing, I think you need to watch the film without watching the actors and watch everything else that's going on around whoever's speaking, because there's always something mad happening. Like the police officer who like constantly is looking down the barrel of his gun, or like the stuff with the stock footage where it's like police car chases, but when the car arrives in the scene it's a completely different car. Like there's always something mad happening. Like, so yeah, you could watch it and then criticise the film for being badly made, but we all know the film's badly made. I mean, it's... Do you know... I think that's just... It all adds to the charm of this film. And you are right, that some of the dialogue is interminable. It goes on far, far, far too long. But I think if you put a screening of this on at the Prince Charles Cinema, I think you'd be rammed. I think you'd be stowed out the door, to be honest. It's just... I mean... It just fills me with joy that this man was so single-minded and focused and getting... I suppose what... I mean, he knew he had this one great film in him, his magnum opus, and it had to get out there into the world, and I'm really glad it did. And the fact that he was still so proud of it, despite its glaring faults, like, up until his death, and when he died, I mean, he died, like, penniless. Like, in 1978 at 54. The fact that he still felt so proud of this film, I think, is just testament to that, and it should be seen purely to celebrate a kind of unique filmmaker in a way.
Yeah, I think that's what's kind of sad about it in a way as well, is that he said, didn't he, that this is going to be the film I'm going to be remembered for. Yeah. But I don't think in his lifetime that really came to pass. Like, I think I read that it was around 1980 that the film started getting shown late night on TV, that it started to slowly become this cult thing. I guess, like with so many artists, it kind of, he wasn't aware of the legacy and the impact that film that he made eventually would have, and he was absolutely right that it really is the film that he will be remembered for, which is kind of absolutely sweet.
Like so many geniuses, he was misunderstood in his own time.
I think that, do you know, I think that is true. I mean, I don't know if he'd had bigger budgets and he'd had kind of all the tools at his disposal that he needed to make this film the way he wanted to, if he had the talent to do it. I don't know. It was something that just never happened to him. It never landed in his lap. And maybe there is a truth to that. Maybe there is a truth to him being this kind of unrecognised genius who was just unable to fulfil a vision that he had in his head, but did the best he could to get as close to it as possible.
Yeah. And, you know, there's so much. I love the idea, again, this is purely coming from the film Ed Wood, but I love the idea that there's so much crap that goes into making a film. And there's so much bureaucracy, there's so much waiting around, there's so much boring kind of red tape, and he kind of like couldn't be bothered with any of that, and he was like, let's get the take, let's move on to the next thing. And like, you know, they say, don't they, in Ed Wood, like the actors he works with all loves him because he gets like 8 scenes done in a day when everyone else gets 1 done in a day and all this. But he was so kind of sure of himself, and that what he was making was exactly what he wanted it to be. And that in itself is kind of weirdly admirable, I think, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he played right into the zeitgeist. Everyone was making this stuff, and he knew that this would be a potential meal ticket for him, making an aliens come to Earth sci-fi film, and that was the film he was absolutely adamant that he was going to make, and he did. And I mean, I think when you revisit a lot of these films, like Earth versus the Flying Saucers, I suppose, which I suppose is one of the closer ones tonally to Plan 9 from Outer Space, it's full of nonsense as well. Like, it's not quite as bad as this, but you can see the wires. Like, you don't read Ed Wood because you can see the wires on his spaceships. He's not the only one that was doing that.
You're so right, exactly. Yep. So there you go. Anything else you guys want to mention before we wrap up? Any other particular highlights of this film that we haven't mentioned yet, or anything else you want to shout out before we wrap up?
I've got a couple of things. I love that Plan 9 from Outer Space involved resurrecting the dead, although they only ever resurrect 3, which is a lady, a man, and an old man. But then we find out later that they have this decomposition ray on the spaceship that can turn anything it hits into a skeleton. Just use that. That's your whole plan. That's it. Use that.
I know. Like, what was the point in bringing people back to then do that? I don't really understand.
Absolutely zero.
Yeah.
And also, my favourite thing in the whole film is there's this kind of governmental cover-up angle that kind of goes on in the background. And there's a bit where they fire loads of missiles up to try and hit these spaceships. And the government's cover-up for that is, just tell them we were shooting at clouds. And I'm like, genius. Remember Donald Trump wanted to blow up hurricanes?
Oh my God.
With nuclear weapons.
See, Edward, he wasn't far off. Mitch, what about you? Any other highlights you want to mention or anything else?
I think we've just about covered everything, to be honest with you. I think that my favourite moments in this were things that I don't think were necessarily designed to be ridiculous. Like I say, I think that the individual moment that I enjoyed the most, in all honesty, was the reveal of the actual kind of like I say, when we saw the flying saucers and stuff like that, I was kind of like very on board. When we saw the aliens, and I was like, I guess they're just humans wearing different shirts. But I mean, but just in general, I mean, like I say, I mean, maybe this is kind of imbued by the fact that my understanding of this comes from watching Ed Wood and stuff like that. This isn't necessarily for me. I'm so glad it exists, and I'm so glad that it has got its audience now, and I'm so glad that it found its audience. Eventually, like, there's a lot of stuff to like in here, and I think that the more you know about what went into it, the better.
Yeah.
Because, like I say, I was braced for something that was going to be way more overtly ridiculous, and I was kind of surprised when it wasn't, and I wasn't ready for it to be so kind of like circuitous and bureaucratic and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that the big moments in it don't land, because they really do. So yeah, I think it's worth seeing. But in terms of talking about individual moments and things like that, I would say that we're just about there.
Yeah. There's only so much to discuss, isn't there? And I totally agree with you, Mitch. Like, I think, like, in some ways, the story around this film and the films about this film and the documentaries are really interesting, maybe more interesting than the film itself. Like, the myth of this film is better than the film itself in a weird way. Like, you know, you can go and listen to You Must Remember This, and there's a really interesting Bela Lugosi Ed Wood episode of that, and obviously there's Tim Burton's Ed Wood, and there's loads of documentaries and there's loads of pieces you can read about it, and I think I kind of enjoyed all of that stuff sort of around the film more than watching the film itself, you know. But yeah,
I think certainly for me anyway, there's an element of truth to that. I'd be inclined to agree with you.
Yeah, I would even agree with that. I think I just, what I really like is just any story of a film that succeeds in any way despite all the obstacles that are thrown in the way, whether it's financial or whether it's director's ego. In the case of this film, I think Ed Wood's own ego was a massive obstacle.
But like I say, I think that the fact that a lot of these kinds of things, I kind of seen them after I've understood what goes into those films and watch films about that. Like, I think that doing that backwards makes me predisposed towards liking it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, I think that, like, understanding something as being someone's passion project rather than just watching it as a film you're watching like any other film, I think that, like, you're predisposed towards enjoying it, and I think that probably contributed a decent amount to what I got out of this. And I think that's probably true of a lot of things, that kind of like air quotes trouble productions that I've watched like down the years and stuff like that. I think that, like, there's a decent amount of that to it, where I think that, like, when you understand the things that people went through in pursuit of this one vision, you kind of go into it wanting to like it. You kind of like, you're kind of rooting for them.
That's it. There's sort of goodwill towards it, isn't there? I think it's one of those.
I think so. Yeah.
So there you go, guys. Thank you so much. My final couple of questions for you, which I like to ask all my guests. First of all, while we're on the topic of kind of alien sci-fi horror, what's your favourite? Do you have a favourite, Andy?
I mean, it's hard to see past Alien as the best Alien film ever made.
It really is.
In terms of kind of cosmic horror and stuff like that, From Beyond.
Oh, yeah.
Huge love for From Beyond.
So good.
Love it.
Good choices. Mitch, what about you? Is your favourite Plan 9 from Outer Space? Or...
No. I think I kind of feel like I want to talk about Another Earth, because I think Another Earth is incredible. I know that the aliens...
Wait, is this a Shyamalan film?
No, that's After Earth.
Oh my god! I was like, wow!
I cannot stress enough how different those two things are.
Okay, fine.
Another Earth, the aliens in Another Earth are the occupants of a duplicate Earth that appears in the sky.
Yes, I remember this.
Yeah,
yes,
the Mike Cahill film from 2011 or so. That's one that I kind of like. If it counts, if it counts, I would shout up for Another Earth. I think that film's incredible. Also, I'm going to be a pain in the arse and talk about J. Dahl's There Are Monsters, because we've spoken about Invasion of the Body Snatchers enough. For this to be relevant, because I think that film was a big debt to that. But There Are Monsters closed Fright Fest Glasgow in 2015. And it was pretty divisive in the room. I watched it and I was like, I loved it so much front to back that I was convinced that I would just like, when the lights came up, the lights would come up to a room that loved it as much as I did. And I was genuinely astonished that they didn't.
Interesting.
And that film is everywhere. I think it's on Amazon Prime. And it's not necessarily established that the creatures are aliens, but I think that, like I say, thematically and kind of like story-wise, there's enough Invasion of the Body Snatchers in it for me to feel like it's pertinent to the conversation. I think that this film is really class. I think it's really special, but a lot of people hate me for that. But I think it's great. I really love it. I'll back it to the hilt. So There Are Monsters is out there. It's great.
I've never seen or heard of There Are Monsters. Well, there you go. I will have to check that out. Andy, did you like There Are Monsters?
Not particularly, Michael. No. Mitch did foist it upon me as one of our kind of monthly Andy versus Mitch episodes on our own show. So
yeah, you weren't impressed.
There was some stuff to like in there, but I'm certainly not as into it as Mitch is. I think it's fair to say.
The Andy versus Mitch episodes of our show, I'm a pain in the arse. I generally dig up festival cuts that I really love that I don't feel like there are enough eyes on. Mm-hmm. But also I'm kind of acutely aware that it's those kinds of things that I feel like I love more than anyone in the world.
Yeah. So there's that kind of, do you get that kind of, it's that sort of Fright Fest-itis where something is so much better for some reason when you're watching it in the bubble of Fright Fest, and then you rewatch it at home and you go, oh my god, it's total shite.
You've got to watch yourself with festival hysteria, don't you? Because I've tripped myself up with this before. I've picked films that it's like, I haven't seen it since I saw it at Fright Fest, but it was great there, so presumably it'll be great now. And then I watched it ahead of the recording and I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
There's been a few times I've caught you out, and by the end of it, you've been like, actually, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is terrible.
Yeah, There Are Monsters was not one of those. Like, I'll stand by that. But, like, there's been times that I've had to just hold my hands up and admit, I was like, you know what? I called this wrong.
The films that make me more genuinely angry, and it's like you said earlier, Mitch, it's more these kind of, like, sort of soulless films where no one really seems to give a shit, and that tends to happen more with the kind of more mainstream stuff. I felt that about The Nun.
Oh god, that's a perfect example of that. Actually,
it is. It's like a spreadsheet of a movie that feels like it has no soul whatsoever, right?
The Casa La Llorona.
It's just, oh god, and I've got to say, Spiral from the Book of Saw as well.
You just watch your fucking mouth, Mike. You just watch your mouth.
It was that sort of film that was worse than a 1-star film because it was a 2-star film. It was like the most beige, bland piece of beigeness I've ever seen in my life. I hated it.
Without agreeing with you on that film specifically, I completely agree with the sentiment. Like I say, I think a 2.5-star film was worse than a 1-star film in so many ways.
Exactly. There you go. Guys, my final question for you then, I've got to ask, what's your favourite horror movie? Andy?
The Wicker Man.
Oh, what a choice. Excellent.
Yeah.
I take it you mean the original, right?
I do mean the original, yeah. That's good. You're not talking to Brad Hansen.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I better just check before I end this call immediately. And Mitch, what about you?
May.
Oh, wow. Amazing choice.
Yeah,
I like
May
that.
Is mine.
I think you're the first ever person on this podcast that's had May as their favourite. That's great. Very, very cool.
Yeah.
Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And just remind us where we can find you guys out there on social media and where people can track down your podcast.
Mitch?
Yeah. Facebook and Instagram. We are Strong Language Violent Scenes. You can tweet us at Strong Violent PC. And I guess also email stronglanguageviolentscenes@gmail.com.
Although no one ever emails.
No one ever does. Yeah, like we were just about to retire it, and then someone emailed. It might have been you, and we were like, you know what? No, let's keep it open for another couple of weeks.
There you go. Guys, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem.
Cheers, Mike. Thank you.
It's a cinch. Here, I look up, I look down. I look up, I look down.
That was a little clip you just heard there from, of course, none other than Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, and that is what we've got going on over on Patreon this week for $10 donors. We are continuing our Hitchcock mini-season. Me and Rhianna Dillon have covered everything from the early British stuff in the 1930s, and this week we've reached pretty much the pinnacle. We've reached two of his most famous and beloved movies, Rear Window from 1954 and Vertigo from 1958, a brilliant double bill of voyeurism and dreamy blondes and all kinds of other fucked up shit. So they were a brilliant pair of movies to discuss in depth. So if you want to get involved and listen to our Hitchcock mini-season as well as our Hellraiser mini-season, then subscribe to Patreon at a $10 level. Or you can go down to a $5 level and still get regular bonus episodes every other week, including reviews of new releases or other kind of special calendar-specific discussions. Very soon, it's going to be Friday the 13th in August, so, you know, I would definitely keep a lookout for something Friday the 13th related coming soon. So sign up now if you want to get treated to all of this bonus content. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. You can sign up at a $3, $5, $10 or $20 level and get different benefits accordingly. But everybody who signs up, no matter where you're from or what tier you sign up to, will get a very special shout out on the podcast as a thank you. So, speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up during the month of May a very special thank you. So a huge thanks to Sarah Miravalski, Isaac Weishout, Rex Cleaver, Michael, Oliver Cowart, Angeli, Eliza Miller, Emily, Laura Manson, Alexandra Skoblicki, Brian Necht, Andreas Jensen, Burton Coggles, Exit Pursued by a Bear, Amber Woodruff, Nora Varkanainen, Esteban Uno, Lauren McCallier, Philip van der Elst, Kelly DeGoyd, Floss, Kaylee Hyde, Ellie Cothran, Michelle, Jacob, Matthew Taylor, The Space Herpy, amazing, Lucy Landau, Cole Legacy Hardy, Alex Walker, Laura, and VJ. A huge thank you to all of those people for signing up to our Patreon. And one more time, if you want to join them, if you want to get regular bonus content and a whole bunch of other treats, then sign up now. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. Okay, well, for the second half of this week's episode, we are going to be wrapping up the 50s American alien invasion movies, and who better to join me than king of sci-fi horror himself to bring us a list of also-rans and additional sci-fi horror recommendations from this era, the Encyclopedia of Fantastic Film and Television. He's back once again, Kevin Lyons. Hello.
Hello, Mike. It's great to be back again.
Lovely.
Excellent stuff.
Well, had to get you back again because you're Mr. Sci-Fi horror, and we've got a few more titles that we want to try and rattle through.
We got a few titles here. I have to admit, I really hang your head in shame that these aren't getting the full treatment. Some of these are masterpieces. I mean, what's the matter with you, man?
I know. I'm always going to get in trouble for missing a few out. That's the problem. This is why we do things like this, so that we can at least give them a mention.
I was vaguely thinking that maybe, my influence had rubbed off on you, but clearly you're not listening to a bloody word I say, are you?
Yeah. Now, let me ask you before. Now, we did touch upon this in our initial chat, but this kind of era of sort of 50 sci-fi alien horror. We've talked about a couple of the biggies already, but there are a lot of them. There are a lot of movies from this era, right? Are you generally a fan of these movies from this era?
Oh, very much so. I mean, even the sort of the really tiny low budget films, I'm quite harsh on them when I write my reviews, but that's because when you write reviews, it's not the same as when you're just sitting there on a Saturday night and thinking, what I want to do is switch my brain off and watch Roger Corman, sort of running around with some giant monsters, and sometimes that's all you need, basically. So there are some great films from the 1950s. There's an awful lot of trash, but isn't that true of any era, to be honest?
It's very true.
You look around now, 90% of everything is trash. I think that's one of those famous statements, isn't it? So but yes, hopefully we've got some real gems amongst this lot. Some you'll know, some maybe less well known.
Absolutely, I'm sure. And let me ask you, before we get started on your list, I mean, we've just this minute finished talking about Plan 9 from Outer Space on the podcast. What are your thoughts on Plan 9?
I will not hear a bad word against Plan 9. It is it is by anybody's standards bloody awful, but I mean in terms of entertainment, you cannot go wrong. I'm one of those people with that old-fashioned opinion that the only crime a film can commit is to be boring. And Plan 9 is never boring. It's stupid, but it's never boring. It's hugely entertaining, and I absolutely adore it. So I'm so glad you gave it the treatment it deserves.
Absolutely. And actually, it's one of those films that was really great to talk about because, it's not just the film itself, but kind of like the myths around the film that are so interesting, right? Everything from even Tim Burton's Ed Wood to all of the documentaries about it, all of the stories about making it and everything, that's as good, if not better, than the film itself, I think.
Well, it's kind of bizarre, isn't it, that this tiny little film, which was sort of slapped together by a bunch of, I want to call them amateurs. They're not. Ed Wood was a professional, but he had kind of an amateur. He was a fan. Yeah. He had that kind of attitude.
They were a bit of a bunch of misfits.
They were a bunch of misfits who just threw this film together, and all these years later, we're still talking about it. And we're not talking about a lot of other films that came out that year. So,
it's so true.
Well done,
it's
Ed.
So
you did good. That was great.
Ed said, didn't he? Famously quoted to have said, "This is going to be the one they'll remember me for," and he was right.
He wasn't wrong, was he? No, it's the one we all love, and I may well go and watch it again after we talked about this. Actually,
yes, exactly. So we are going to rattle through a few additional recommendations, movies that we sadly didn't get time. I gave Kevin a very difficult task of, I said, right, come up with a list and come back and see what we've got. But did you manage to sort of get together a nice list of titles, Kev?
I did indeed, and we're going to kick off with one of the classics, and this is one of those, honestly, that you haven't given this its own space. You've given the remake its own space, but the Thing from Another World from 1951.
Is it human or inhuman? Earthly or unearthly? Baffling questions, astounding questions that not even the world's greatest scientific minds can answer.
Gentlemen, do you realize what we've found? A being from another world, as different from us as one pole from the other.
Come here. Get in the corner. Now hold this in front of you. Stay by the light switch.
1.9. Needles hit the top.
What a film. Absolutely marvellous. We all know John Carpenter did a brilliant remake of it. Yeah. And in fact, I wouldn't even call it a remake because they're both actually just adaptations of a short story. So it's, it's a different thing in a way. This was the original. This was 1951. It was also, I think, possibly the first time we'd ever seen belligerent aliens actually arriving on Earth. So it was a bit of a groundbreaker in that respect. It's the one about the alien intellectual carrot that gets thawed out in the Arctic ice. And first serious alien threat to mankind. It was also one of the first American science fiction films to really use the alien invader as an allegory.
Yeah.
It was, the whole sort of keep watching the skies, at the end, watch the skies, watch the skies. I think he was talking as much about, sort of Russian bombers and intercontinental ballistic missiles as he was aliens. I think that was all part of that thing that was going on at the time, It's death's going to come from above, whether it's from the aliens or from the Ruskies,
That's right. Now, I reckon so many people, of course, especially sort of younger horror fans, will have seen the John Carpenter version and may not have seen this. So what could they expect? Is it similar to the John Carpenter thing, or is it entirely different?
Very, very different. It departs greatly from the novella. It's based on this 1938 novella by John W. Campbell. And in the novella, it's a shape-changing alien, just like it is in John Carpenter's film. 1951, well, with the best will in the world, they didn't have the special effects technology to do that. It wasn't going to happen. So instead, you've got a very large man in a sort of makeup effect. But that's not to say it doesn't work. It works amazingly. There's a wonderful shot, absolutely brilliant, where they're all chatting away and they open the door and it's standing behind the door.
Oh, it's great.
And it really makes you jump. Even now, you think, oh my God, there it is, even though you know it's coming. It's really, it's scary in a different way to the John Carpenter.
Yes.
John Carpenter's is much more visceral. It's much gorier. This one, it's much more to do with, literally things hiding behind doors.
Yeah,
it's that kind of scary. But I think,
and I guess along similar lines to Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I mean, this came before it, didn't it? But it's got that kind of, sort of insidious kind of communist threat vibe to it as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, the alien comes from outer space. He could quite easily have come from just across the pole, to be honest. That's and this is the start of that, I think, in American science fiction films of the 1950s. It was a very early outlier of that whole sort of paranoia thing, which the John Carpenter film doesn't really have, but it didn't need to at that point.
No,
he was trying to do different things. They're very, very different films. Both of them are absolutely brilliant. Both of them have to be seen on their own terms, I think.
Yes,
but
agreed.
But certainly, if you like the John Carpenter, go back and watch the original. It's an eye opener how different it is. And it is a wonderful film in its own right.
Yeah, and such an one of the earliest, really.
Yeah, 1951. I mean, that was a big year, 1951. We'll come to another 1951 film in a moment. But yeah, this was the beginning of that whole... There had been earlier science fiction films. There had been a couple the year before. But this was the first big one. This was the one that really took the public by storm. And just because it was so brilliantly made. There's always been some doubt as to who actually directed it.
Yes.
Whether it was Christian Nyby or Howard Hawks. And after all these years, I don't care. It's a great film. It doesn't matter which one of them directed it, or even both of them together. Who knows? They did an absolutely outstanding job on it. It's beautifully atmospheric. It's a film that you don't expect to be atmospheric because you think, it's just going to be a monster lurking around in a base. But it's very creepy.
It is, actually. It is. And I think it's because it's got that sort of really good story, good suspense, good performances, good writing, right? And I think... because of that, it doesn't matter about dated effects or makeup or whatever else.
No, of course not. And that's the thing. I mean, I moan about dated effects as much as the next man, but sometimes it really doesn't matter.
Yes.
Sometimes, you forget that the effects don't look that great anymore, and one day the John Carpenter film will start to look dated. It hasn't yet, but one day...
It's true.
The next generation after that for me, will probably be looking at it and thinking, it's a bit rubbish, isn't it? Where's all the CGI?
It's true. Yeah.
We'll have them rounded up and shot.
Exactly. So. We don't want to know those people. No,
good Lord, no.
So there you go. So that was The Thing from Another World from 1951. Now, annoyingly, it doesn't seem to be very sort of readily available in the UK to get on a nice Blu-ray or DVD or anything like that at the moment, which is sad, at least in the UK. But I'm sure people can find it in some way or another. It seems to be...
It's out there to be found.
And it's on TV quite a lot, I think, as well, that film.
It is.
It's an old classic.
And definitely, when you get a chance, do watch it because... like I say, it's very different to The Carpenter.
Yeah.
But it's a great film on its own terms.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. So there you go. So that was first on our list, The Thing from Another World. Kev, what's next? You said there was another movie from 1951. Is that right?
There was.
Yeah.
A very different science fiction film, but one no less brilliant, The Day the Earth Stood Still.
We interrupt this program to give you a bulletin just received from one of our naval units at sea. A large object traveling at supersonic speed is headed over the North Atlantic toward the east coast of the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Drew Pearson. We bring you this special radio television broadcast in order to give you the very latest information on an amazing phenomenon, the arrival of a space ship in Washington. The Army has taken every precaution to meet any emergency which may develop. Just a minute, ladies and gentlemen, I think something is happening.
Now, in a lot of ways, this isn't really a horror film at all. This is more of Gort, the giant robot, is a bit scary, to be honest. You wouldn't want to meet him on a dark night, would you?
Yes.
But it's much more of an allegorical story. It's a really intelligent science fiction film. It's, later in the decade, in fact, later next couple of years, in fact, we'd kind of devolved a little bit into mutant rubber monsters wandering about cheap sets.
Yeah.
But at this stage, they were still doing very intelligent science fiction films for grown-ups. And this is a superb example of that. This is wonderful. It's it's a proper classy prestige production. It's got money thrown at it. It's got intellect thrown at it. It's about this guy, this alien, Klaatu, comes to Earth. His spaceship lands in the middle of Washington. And he's accompanied by this gigantic robot, Gort. And Klaatu gets shot.
Yes.
Typical response. I mean, this is another brilliant example of that sort of paranoia of the era.
Yeah.
That the first thing that happens to him when he comes out is he gets shot.
Yeah.
He's not an invading alien, is he? To be fair, he's not actually a very nice guy. He comes down here to bully us into submission, but he didn't deserve to be shot.
No, shot on arrival, bit harsh.
Shot on arrival.
Yeah.
He kind of waves and sort of, points his thing at people and they shoot him. But anyway, he goes undercover, wanders about Washington, befriends a young boy and learns a lot about the human race as a consequence.
Yes.
And there's not very much action in it.
No.
There's not any sort of big scares, but it's a really clever and engaging film. It switches your brain on when you're watching it. It makes you think. There's a very clever... It's subtle, but it's there, but there's a very clever religious allegory going on in there.
Interesting.
Well, Klaatu descends from above. He adopts the name John Carpenter, strangely enough.
Yes.
Notice those initials.
JC, yeah.
Yeah, and the trade implied by the surname. He gets killed. He rises again and ultimately ascends to heaven at the end.
There you go.
And this was all deliberately in the script, but 20th Century Fox, the producers, asked them to tone it down a little bit.
Yes.
In fact, so much so that Robert Wise, the director, he later admitted that he didn't even realise it was there when he was shooting it.
Fantastic.
But you can see it. It's really, really clever. It's subtle, but it's there. And it's a marvellous film because it's a rarity that it places the alien among the ordinary people. We see the military at the beginning and there's a scientist he goes to visit, but mainly it's him with a secretary and her young boy, and we see this visitation by this alien through their eyes rather than seeing it through the military or the scientists, which is what became the norm very soon after this. Yeah.
That's right, yeah. Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, I remember really enjoying it. It's been a long time since I've seen it. And it's directed by the brilliant Robert Wise, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that right? Who, obviously would go on to direct The Haunting, right?
And the scariest film of all time, let us not forget, The Sound of Music. Absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. So, he's... it's funny. What an amazingly broad sort of filmography he's had, actually. But he can do sort of really kind of interesting, subtle, ideas-based stuff, can't he? Just as much as he can do those big, all guns blazing musicals.
Of course, yeah. And of course, from our perspective, you're looking at it, it is the clever idea stuff that sticks in the mind. It is A Day the Earth Stood Still. It is The Haunting. Those are the things that we come back to.
Absolutely.
But very, very, very clever director, and clearly very committed to this film. It's shot through with this sort of sense of pacifism. And it's relentlessly optimistic the whole time, even though at the end, he tells us, we're watching you, behave yourselves, don't, he's a bit of a sort of a school teacher figure at the end.
Yes,
wagging his finger, behave yourselves or else, but even so, it's still optimistic. It ends with us not having had to fight off an alien invasion, and maybe we've learned something about ourselves in the process, just as he has about us.
Imagine that.
It's unlikely in the real world, I know, but we have to have hope, Mike. We have to have hope.
Exactly. So there you go. So that was the brilliant The Day the Earth Stood Still from 1951, and you can rent that on Amazon Prime and all the usual places. So it's definitely worth a watch. Definitely. It's a real classic, that, isn't it?
Oh, it's brilliant. Don't go into it expecting scary monsters and nasty aliens.
No.
It's a different kind of scary.
Yes, indeed. All right, Kev, lovely. What's next on your list?
Next is It Came From Outer Space.
Yes, it came from outer space to fill the world with terror, to bring you unforgettable suspense. What was it? Where did it come from? Who were the all-powerful creatures it brought from outer space? And what did they want on Earth? You can learn the amazing answer only when you see the most thrilling picture in years. It came from outer space. in the astonishing realism of 3 dimension, with objects coming right out of the screen, so real they almost touch you.
1953. Now, is that not the quintessential 50s science fiction alien invasion movie title? It came
100%.
from outer space.
Like, if I had to put a name of this chat we're having, it would be that, right? It came from outer space. Yeah.
I think if you spoke to anybody who had no idea about 50s science fiction films and asked them to name a title, that they'd guess that just because it sounds like it should be a 1950s science fiction film. You know, it is the perfect title.
Right.
And it's one of those titles which, you know, it says exactly what it is. It is about a small town invasion. And based on a story and a screen treatment by the great Ray Bradbury. He's not credited on screen, but, you know, he did actually work on it. And it's directed by the legendary, in our circles, Jack Arnold. Now, you didn't get many science fiction auteurs. You didn't get many people in science fiction that were the equivalent of, say, Terence Fisher or Mario Bava or George Romero. You know, there were directors who specialised so much in science fiction. Arnold was the one who came the closest. As well as doing It Came From Outer Space, he did some fantastic films. The Incredible Shrinking Man. Marvellous. Tarantula. Creature from the Black Lagoon. I mean, you know, these are all great films that he was part of. And he liked a desert setting. And you know,
that's right. There's a lot of desert in this film.
There's a lot of desert in this film, and you know that was a big deal around this sort of time. A year later, we had Them, which was a tale of giant ants in the desert. So, but those sort of small town desert settings were his speciality, and this kind of owes a little bit of a debt, I suppose, to what they were trying to do with Invasion of the Body Snatchers and films like that. That you know, you've got this sort of invasion by stealth. And it's not even an invasion, now that I come to think of it. These aren't aliens who are out, you know. They're not coming down here for our women and all the rest of that nonsense that you were getting at the time. They're stuck here.
They've crash-landed or something, have they?
They've crash-landed.
That's right.
They've crash-landed in the desert, and all they want to do is go home.
That's right.
And, you know, it's like the thing is that they can shape change, so they look like humans, but in their original form, they do look really horrific. Yes. They look really nasty. So, of course, when people see them in their original form, it's guns out, you know, so we want them out, off our land, all that sort of nonsense, you know. But they're not here to hurt us. They don't want to enslave us or conquer us or any of that sort of nonsense. All they want to do is fix their spaceship and go home.
That's right.
So it's a very unusual bunch of aliens, really, but still very, very effective.
Yeah, there's a lot of... They kind of look a bit like sort of jellyfish with one big eye, don't they?
That's right, and they've got this sort of floating motion when they move. It's genuinely alien-looking aliens, you know...
That's right. And don't we get a kind of sort of alien POV? We get an almost like alien lens, don't we? Yeah. It's
funny. It was shot in 3D. It was part of that first 3D boom, and so you have this kind of... I mean, you know it's shot in 3D because the opening scene is this meteorite crashing into the Earth, which turns out to be a spaceship, and it flies straight into your face.
You know,
that's it's unfortunate that even on video you could see the wires holding it up. On Blu-ray, they're like sort of steel girders holding the damn thing up. But you know, we'll ignore that.
It's all part of the charm.
It's all part of the charm. This POV shot in 3D, I've never seen it in 3D, but I can imagine it'll work really well because it's got like this tunnel effect which draws you into the picture. It's kind of the edges of the frame are blurred out.
That's right.
And so that would look magnificent. I'm not a great fan of 3D, mainly because it doesn't work on my knackered old eyes. I can't actually see it happening. But I'd love to see this one in 3D just to see those shots. They look fantastic in flat. So
that's so you're so right. So there you go. It's a fun little movie. That's It Came From Outer Space from 1953. And again, you can rent that in all the normal places. I think you can pick up a DVD of it as well if you want. And it's a good fun watch, isn't it, that one?
It's a lot of fun. All of these films on this list are a lot of fun. Some are better than others, but I've tried to choose ones that are they're just good fun, you know. Sort of, some will engage your brain. Some of them you can switch your brain off. That's sometimes what you want.
That's always nice, isn't it? Yeah. Lovely. Okay, so there you go. So what's next on our list?
Well, we're crossing the Atlantic. We're coming home for the next one. We're going to look at X the Unknown from 1956.
He runs as though the devil himself is in pursuit. And well he might, for he saw what no man has ever seen before.
this way. The man on the main gate had it just like the others. It's coming in on the west side. Look! There it is, on the roof!
3 experts in science and security lead a band of men who try to find a way to exterminate X, the unknown terror.
It's a Hammer film.
Aha.
In fact. And it started life as a Quatermass film. Well, sort of.
Yes.
They wanted to make... You'll be covering... I can't remember. Have you covered it by now?
No,
if not, you will be covering.
We will be covering it next week, I believe. Quatermass Experiment from 1955, I think, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they'd had this huge sort of impact with Quatermass Experiment. It was a film that really sort of set Hammer on this road. You know, the Gothics would start with The Curse of Frankenstein, which is, of course, a science fiction film as well as a horror film. And that started in 1957, but this was where they really started. This is what opened the door. So they'd had this huge success with the Quatermass Experiment, and they wanted more of the same. So Jimmy Sangster, who was their, sort of house screenwriter at the time, started writing a new Quatermass script. Nigel Neal said, "Oh, no, you're not, matey. You're absolutely not using my character." So they had to very quickly change it. And when you watch X the Unknown, if you watch it back to back with Quatermass Experiment and then with Quatermass 2,
yes,
they are of a piece. You can see what they were trying to do. The hero of the piece, Dr. Adam Royston, played by Dean Jagger, he's very much a Quatermass clone. So it's kind of where they were coming from, and it's interesting for a lot of reasons. But one of the reasons is that it's about this sort of blob. It's not really about an alien, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's about a blob that comes from beneath the earth. So it's coming from not from outer space, but from inner space. And it's kind of a blob, like radioactive blob. And it beat The Blob to the screen by a couple of years. So it's the first of the sort of the Blob movies, which is why it's kind of important. Yeah. And it was directed by a guy called Leslie Norman. Now, some of us of a certain age will know his son very well. His son was Barry Norman.
No way!
Who was the film critic. Yes. So this was directed by Barry Norman's dad.
Wow.
So, yeah, there you go. I don't know that Barry ever actually did a critique of this film.
No.
But I would love to have known what he made of his dear old dad's, science fiction blob movie.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's great.
fun.
I had no idea that he actually came from a filmmaker family. That's interesting.
Oh yes, yeah. So for all the all the slagging off we used to do of him because he didn't like horror films, he did. To be fair, he had some credentials. He did come up from a family who knew what they were doing, and I think Leslie Norman does quite a good job on X the Unknown. To be honest, it was going to originally have been done by Joseph Losey.
Yeah.
But he fell ill, so Leslie Norman, well, they say he fell ill. He was actually blacklisted at the time, which was, I think, more to the point that, he was, fell ill. I think it was a euphemism.
Right, yes.
But Leslie Norman took over kind of at the last minute and does a fairly good job of it. It's not as good as the Quatermass films. Don't get your hopes up on that score, but it is a great deal of fun. You've got, sort of soldiers stomping around the Scottish Highlands, being played by somewhere just outside Bray Studios, and I don't think they go anywhere further north than Watford, to be honest. But but it's meant to be set in the Scottish Highlands, and it's this radioactive blob that comes out of the ground and devours people. So
fantastic.
I mean, what's not to love?
I know. I love the entire IMDb plot synopsis for it. Is literally a radioactive mud-like creature terrorizes a Scottish village. That's all you need to know. That's
all you. There's a wonderful throwaway line in it where one of the scientists sort of looks at the carnage that this thing has wrought upon the landscape and says, "How do you kill mud?" Which is a fair question, I think. How do you kill mud?
That's a very fair question. Yeah,
it's a very fair question. Yeah, if you liked Quatermass, you're going to like this. It's not, like I say, it's not as good.
Yes,
Quatermass. Don't. So go in expecting that. But it's, again, a lot of very solid fun.
Oh, that's fantastic. So there you go. So that's X the Unknown from 1956. You can rent that, stream it online. You can also buy a nice Blu-ray of it by the looks of it as well, or a DVD.
Yes,
so
indeed.
That's available everywhere for you to check out. Excellent. And we will be, as you mentioned there, Kev, I will be discussing the Quatermass movies for the next 2 weeks, actually. So look forward to that. And I finally, because actually last time we spoke, I hadn't seen any of them. I've now seen all of them. That's right. And I'm a big fan. I really enjoyed all of them.
They're brilliant, aren't they? They're really good. Have you been back to watch the TV? What's left of the TV series?
Yes, I've watched the first, what there is of the first series, and a bit of the second. I haven't yet watched The Pit, the TV version of The Pit.
Yes.
So I've still got to catch up on that. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Yeah.
This is one of those moments where I'm so jealous and where being old is really, really painful, because you're seeing these things for the first time. And I would love, if anybody out there is into science fiction but is a scientist and can invent a device you can insert into my ear to selectively remove a few memories, just take out a few of my favourite films so that I can watch them again for the first time.
That would be great, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Wouldn't that be good?
I know what you mean now when you told me about Brian Donlevy playing Quatermass. He's I found him a bit of a weak link in the first two films, to be honest. But anyway,
I can't remember if I mentioned it in the first time round, but my favourite description of him comes from Jonathan Rigby, who called him a walking trench coat, which
is perfect. That's perfect.
Spot on. Yeah, he's absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
So there you go. So X the Unknown, fantastic. What's next on your list, Kev?
What's next is Not of This Earth.
Killer's a fiend of the most diabolical kind. 13. Maybe more. He's looking for only one thing. Blood.
Human victims for human blood. Experiment in horror to satisfy a desperate need never before known. A need that was not of this earth.
This is Space Vampires.
Amazing. Space Vampires.
Space Vampires, long before Life Force. This is Space Vampires, and it's from Roger Corman.
Oh, brilliant.
Now, we can't be talking about 50 science fiction films without mentioning Roger Corman, to be honest.
Absolutely.
He made a lot of them. Day the Earth Ended, It Conquered the World, Attack of the Crab Monsters, what a great title. War of the Satellites, The Wasp Woman. He made a lot of films. To be fair, most of them weren't great, but again, they were fun. This, I think, is his genuinely good 1950s science fiction film.
Brilliant.
He's wonderful. Stars Beverly Garland, who was a bit of an icon for fans of lower budgeted 1950s science fiction. She plays a nurse who's sent to tend to the needs of this mysterious chap called Mr. Johnson, who only ever wears shades, he's all the time, even at night. Right. Very strange, talks in a very odd way. And it turns out he's one of a group of aliens from the planet Davana who have arrived on Earth with eyes that can kill. If they take the sunglasses off, their eyes are all completely white and they melt your brains or something.
Fantastic.
And so, that's why they wear the shades. And they're here because they've developed as an entire species. Because as we know, in science fiction, if something happens to one person on a planet, it happens to everybody on the planet, no matter where they are on the planet, no matter what race they may be, or age, or gender, or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever happens to one person on a planet in a science fiction movie, it happens to everybody, So everybody on Davana has developed this incurable and fatal blood condition. So they're down here trying to find a good supply of blood.
Yeah.
So they're kind of high-tech space vampires. And
amazing.
So it's a lot more intelligent, actually, than I've made it sound. It's actually quite a clever film. Wow. Yeah, it's there's a lot going on. It's also a very funny film. You get these great skits with Dick Miller.
Oh, yeah.
Who was, a regular in the Roger Corman films at the time. He plays a very persistent Hoover salesman. He keeps turning up at inopportune moments. So there's lots of humour in it as well.
Yeah.
But it's actually quite a smart film. It's quite clever. I don't want to give too much else away about it. I will say that's got an absolutely cracking final shot.
Oh, okay.
I mean, stick with it to the very end. It's you'll never forget the final shot. It's very, very clever.
Oh, wow. Okay, fantastic.
And it's one of those films that it's sort of stuck in the psyche of people who saw it. Certainly by 1988, it's still in the mind of Jim Wynorski. Now, maybe you don't know Jim Wynorski. He's a bit of a purveyor of ultra-low budget schlock.
Yes, absolutely.
A bit of a sort of successor to Corman in some ways. He had a go at remaking it in 1988. In fact, he remade it as a bet. He said he could remake it on the same budget, adjusted for inflation, as the first film. And it would have been a complete disaster had he not managed to persuade Tracy Lords to appear in it, making her first legit film after leaving porn.
Oh, wow.
So that gave it the most amazing publicity. Also, great surprise to everybody, Tracy could act.
Oh, wow.
She was actually, I mean, she's not Meryl Streep, she's not going to win an Oscar, but she's easily comparable with all the other actresses of that level, probably better than most.
Fantastic.
And then, they remade it again later, but Tracy Lords wasn't in it, so no one cared. But it was, the original is fantastic. It's a huge amount of fun.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, and I see that it was actually, it was played as a double feature with Attack of the Crab Monsters, apparently.
That's right, yes. Well, Corman and AIP and all the companies you work for, they generally shot these films back to back to sort of make up these double bills, and this was definitely the pick of that particular double bill.
Fantastic.
It's a great film. Go and give it a watch. It's a lot of silly fun.
Yeah, that's great. So there you go. So that's Not of This Earth from 1957, and you can stream that for free on Prime Video if you subscribe to Prime. So there you go. No excuse not to check it out.
No excuse not to go and watch that. In fact, stop listening to my wittering. Go and watch it now. Come back to me after. I shouldn't say that on your podcast.
No,
Mike,
don't tell anyone to stop listening, Kev.
I've never been good at that sort of thing.
Fantastic. All right, what's next?
Next, we're back in Britain again with a film called Fiend Without a Face from 1958.
Does it come from another country or another world? This terrifying menace that G2 must destroy before it's too late.
Image is fading, sir.
There it goes again. Same trouble.
How can they stop this invisible force whose only warning is a weird, blood-chilling sound? Only two people still alive can help this agent find the answers. The girl who could be a spy, and the scientist who could be the destroyer of the entire human race.
Now, again, this isn't Aliens.
Okay.
But this really is coming from the inner mind. These are thought monsters.
Oh, okay.
And it's a Base Under Siege film. And, any Doctor Who fan will tell you all about the Base Under Siege story. It was, particularly in the Patrick Troughton era, it was virtually every bloody week there was a base under siege somewhere. And this is pretty much that sort of thing. It's set in Canada because they thought that, if they set it in Britain, Americans wouldn't like it very much. And if they set it in Canada, it might appeal to, the Commonwealth countries. So it's set in Canada, but again, it's shot in Hertfordshire or somewhere. So don't go into it looking for verisimilitude. It's not there.
Right.
But it's directed by Arthur Crabtree, who was formerly a director and cinematographer of Gainsborough melodramas.
Okay.
So this was kind of a change of pace for him. Mm-hmm. And it's about this Air Force base. There's a scientist who's been experimenting with thought control and thought patterns. And it's unleashed these monsters, which originally are invisible.
Right.
They're invisible for a really good reason.
What's that?
They didn't have any money, so they kept them invisible for as long as they possibly could. But then at the end, and this is where it really kicks off, something happens and they become visible, and they're hideous brains with long sort of tail. They're brain-like creatures. They were a lot of stop-motion animation done by a German company to make them move, and by God, is it grisly.
Fantastic.
For its day. It's really nasty. The British press were up in arms.
Oh, really?
When it was released in London, the end of '58. They just couldn't believe it because it was these brain monsters get shot and start, sort of oozing blood and slime and God knows what else. In fact, there was a question raised in Parliament over it. I mean, this, tiny little B movie actually got as far as Parliament. What is the British film industry thinking by trying to beat Hollywood in its own game of overdosing on blood and gore?
Oh, wow, that's brilliant.
You have to imagine that being said in one of those sort of terribly clipped 1950s British voices, utter outrage in every word. But
I'm just reading James Rolfe, the critic, called the film the best killer brain movie ever, and stated that it may be the goriest film of all time. That's fantastic.
I suspect at the time I think it probably was at the time because it was in black and white. They kind of got away with it, But it's fantastically gruesome, and the brain monsters are marvellous. Absolutely wonderful. Dear old Norman J. Warren, who sadly passed away not that long ago when we were recording this, he was trying to remake it for a very long time. It was kind of his pet project to try and do a remake of it. And sadly, it just never happened. He could never find the funding for it because, such is the state of the British film industry. A tiny little film like that, can't get the money. And over in America, Roy Frumker's also announced that he was trying to set up a version. So this, again, is one of those films that a lot of people saw it when they were younger, when they were kids, and it really stuck in their minds. You know, you may not remember much about the first half of the film. You'll never forget the last reel.
That's really
because
interesting.
It's so grisly.
And that's certainly something we've talked about so much with these 50s movies. I think Kim Newman said, you know, because something like 1953 War of the Worlds was so important to people like Steven Spielberg, it subsequently is now still so important to the world because they've kind of taken so many of those tropes, all of those, you know, like we've said, Carpenter, Craven, whoever else, they've all sort of taken these 50s B-movie tropes, right, and done amazing new things
and
with
redone them.
Yeah,
and of course, you know, they were certainly when I was a lad and I was growing up, they were on TV all the time.
Yeah.
You know, they were staple. You don't really see them so much on television nowadays, sadly, but we grew up with them. Our generation grew up watching these films, so they became a sort of a staple part of our viewing, and they informed everything about our appreciation about these films. You know, it's
fantastic.
So they're great, and I hope people will go and watch Fiend Without a Face because I think it's.
I am really keen to check it out now. I'm definitely going to give it a watch. So
it's great fun.
Yeah, you've sold me on that. 1958, Fiend Without a Face. You can buy that on DVD, or you can rent it for £3 on Amazon as well. So there you go.
A bargain.
Fantastic. Fiend Without a Face. I love it. So, Kev, what's next?
What's next? We've got It, the Terror from Beyond Space. We need some reverb on that, Mike.
Oh, yeah.
It's the Terror from Beyond Space. I mean, it's one of those titles. It needs reverb, so I do hope you're going to put that on and not leave me sitting here sounding like a complete tit doing that. So,
how could that thing have gotten aboard? And why? Just to kill us?
What is the usual reason an intelligent creature kills?
It's hungry. What makes you so certain it's intelligent, Colonel, not just an animal?
Can't open the door to see compartment.
This is from 1958, and to be honest with you, it's not a great film, but it is kind of important. It's the Terror from Beyond Space. I mean, who knew that this wasn't going to be a great film? You know, so, it was originally going to be called It, the Vampire from Beyond Space, which I'm not sure is better or worse. To be honest, but there you go.
A lot of space vampires on this list.
A lot of space vampires on this one. The reason this one is sort of important, and put those in really big inverted commas important, is there is kind of a forerunner of Alien.
Oh, interesting.
It's about a mission to Mars that unwittingly picks up an alien monster.
Yep.
And starts bringing it back on the return journey, and it starts making short work of the crew en route, and it even ends with the monster being killed by being trapped in an airlock.
Oh, wow.
So it is, I mean, remarkably similar, not in tone, but certainly in story.
Yes.
To Alien. Now, it was directed by a guy called Edward L. Kahn, who was a bit of a specialist in this sort of no-budget schlock. He did things like some great titles: Creature with the Atom Brain, great, Zombies of Mora Tau, Invasion of the Saucer Men.
Oh, wow, yeah.
But yeah, it's not a great film, but like I say, it's kind of important because you can watch it now and think, oh, yeah, I think I know where they got Alien from. You know, when Dan O'Bannon was writing it and when Ridley Scott was directing, I wonder if they were watching this film around. Because again, you know, it would have been on TV. They would have been growing up in America and Britain.
Yes.
Watching this film. It would have stuck in their minds, you know.
Absolutely.
So,
that's really interesting. Okay, yeah, and I've just reading about it now. It does seem to be very much a sort of forerunner for Dan O'Bannon's Alien. Yeah, that's
definitely
really interesting.
When you watch it, I mean, it becomes more obvious than I'm making it when you're watching it. You can't help but think, oh God, that's Alien, isn't it? Yeah, you can see where it came from. And at the time Alien came out, not everybody was impressed by it. A lot of the critics were saying, oh, it's just a B-movie with a lot of money attached. Of course it's just a B-movie with a lot of money attached to it. That's why we loved it. It's just a very expensive B-movie. And this was the B-movie that it was, you know, I'm not going to say ripping off, but it was an echo of It, the Terror from Beyond Space.
That's so interesting. Yet another kind of classic that was inspired by a 50s B-movie. There you go.
Like I said, they grew up watching this stuff.
Yeah.
It's very much like, you know, when punk came along and they were saying, oh yeah, Death to the Dinosaurs. Yeah. And then it turned out years later they all loved prog rock and krautrock and all the rest of it because they grew up listening to it.
That's right. That's right.
And this is the same with filmmakers. They grew up watching this stuff. Of course it seeps in. I don't know whether, you know, things are conscious. I'm not sort of for 1 minute suggesting people sat down and thought, right, we're going to remake it, The Terror from Beyond Space, but we're not going to tell anybody we're doing it. But it's got to have been there in the back of their minds.
Yeah,
absolutely. You know, it will have been there the whole time.
Yeah.
So,
well, fantastic. So there you go. So that was it, The Terror from Beyond Space. What a fantastic title.
It is a great title.
So good. And you can rent that on Amazon or Apple TV for $3.49, or you can even buy the Blu-ray for $5.99. So there you go. It's
just
cheap
buy the
and cheerful.
Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Yes, it's marvellous. Buy the Blu-rays. you can always sell it for probably more than that if you don't like it.
It's true. It's true, yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Kev, what's next on your list?
Well, I've kind of reached the end of my list. Those are the ones I think I would recommend people to go and watch. But I've got a few honourable mentions that we can very briefly run through. We should look at Invaders from Mars, at least give it a mention. William Cameron Menzies' film from 1953. Yeah, it's kind of a kid's film. Yeah, we get that. We know that. But the aliens in it are actually quite impressive. There's, the sort of the control alien, the sort of head in the fish tank.
Yes.
That's really quite effective, quite creepy. So, that's a good one. Of course, it was remade by Toby Hooper many years later.
Absolutely.
Not one of his best films. It was one of those Toby Hooper films that we all go, yeah, nice try, Toby. Now go and do something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre again. Oh yeah, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. No, don't do that.
No, not that. Yeah, not that. Oh god.
Be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. Yeah.
I could also highly recommend This Island Earth by Joseph M. Newman from 1955. Now, this one is more of a sort of straight science fiction film, but we have got. They eventually take off from Earth. He's very earthbound, and eventually they do go to the planet Metaluna, where they meet the Metaluna mutants, which is this rather sort of insectoid monster. And he's only in it very briefly, but he's become an iconic alien figure. And although it's a fabulous film, although it's probably not quite horror enough to warrant a full mention, but definitely worth watching just for the Metaluna mutant at the end.
Excellent.
And it's a great fun film. It's really, really good.
Okay, that's This Island Earth.
Oh, sorry, yes, This Island Earth, yes. A couple of films with Ray Harryhausen special effects. How can you go wrong with Ray Harryhausen special effects? We've got Earth versus the Flying Saucers from 1956. Not a great film again, but when those effects kick in, we all know the big effect sequences of the flying saucers making this horrible screeching sound, crashing into Washington monuments.
Yes.
Brilliant. And that was all animated by Ray Harryhausen.
Perfect.
Absolutely marvellous. So watch it for the effects rather than for anything else, because it's an okay film. It's not great, but just watch it for the Harryhausen effects. And indeed, watch 20 Million Miles to Earth for the Harryhausen effects. The Venusian Ymir. I'm never quite sure how you pronounce that. But this little tiny little cute little sort of reptilian monster that comes back on board this Venus space mission, which inevitably, alien-like, turns into a towering great monster, which then goes on the rampage through Rome.
Brilliant.
And you've got this wonderful, iconic scene of it astride the Colosseum in Rome, being shot down. He's doing his King Kong moment. He's on the Colosseum. Absolutely great stuff. Directed by Nathan Duran. A lot of fun again. I keep using that word fun. These films are fun.
Yeah, so
That's
much
what
fun.
we're looking for here. My last honourable mention, it's got probably the most fun title of all of them. I Married a Monster from Outer Space.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yes. Great. I mean, again, it's one of those films that's actually a lot more serious than the title might suggest.
Yeah.
It's, it sounds like a joke. I Married a Monster from Outer Space. It sounds like an episode of a particularly bad sitcom. But it's
really
not.
does.
It's actually quite a serious film. It's got quite a lot to say. So again, I can highly recommend that one. That was
that's great. I love that. Yeah, what a great title. Something we talked about with The Blob was that it really felt like this was the first generation of movies that really felt like they were specifically aimed at teenagers as well, don't they? That kind of era of drive-in movies and double bills, late night movies. It really sort of all began here, didn't it, with these kind of monsters? And they really, you could tell how much they sold it on their posters, on their titles, that kind of thing,
Well, if you just go back and listen to what we've done here, we've done them chronologically.
Yeah.
So 1951, there were no teenagers.
Yes, that's
They didn't
right.
exist yet. So we got the thing from Another World. We got the day the Earth stood still. Then, by the time we got to the late 50s, rock and roll has started. We got, Not of This Earth and Fiend Without a Face with all the blood and gore. The Terror from Beyond Space. I mean, if you were a 14, 15-year-old kid in 1958 and you walked past a cinema that was showing The Terror from Beyond Space, how fast would you have got your money out and handed it over to the box office? So you can see throughout that 10-year period the whole thing changed.
Yeah.
From being these very serious, very grown-up films to being kind of driving stuff. I can't remember who said it, but one of the producers said that we made our films basically as background. They were there for when the kids got a little bit exhausted from trying to get it on in the car, and they'd look up for 10 minutes because they just needed a breather. And so we just make sure there was enough going on to keep them entertained, for short stretches.
Well, that's it. And it's so funny, isn't it? And that's something, again, I talked about when we talked about The Blob, was that, who'd have thought that when these filmmakers made The Blob, that 70-something years later, people would still be talking about it on a podcast, because these movies were so sort of throwaway in a way, weren't they?
Well, certainly not the filmmakers. The filmmakers never considered. I mean, the filmmakers were like, right, get it out, get it out quick, stack them high, sell them cheap, get them out there, make them fast as possible, and let's get on to the next one.
Exactly. It's so funny, isn't it? And that's why there was, of course, so many of them, and so many of them that we've had to cover this week. So, Kev, before we finish up, let's just rattle through your list one more time so everyone can make sure they can jot down those titles. Run through your list from beginning to end for us.
In chronological order, there is The Thing from Another World from 1951. From the same year, The Day the Earth Stood Still. 1953, It Came from Outer Space. I still think that's the greatest title in the whole lot.
Brilliant.
I'm going to do it again. Get that reverb ready.
Yes.
We're going to do it on this. It Came from Outer Space.
Yes.
1956, X the Unknown. And then we've got Not of This Earth from 1957. Although the 1988 film is ludicrously good fun. I mean, it is really stupid. They camp it up. They turn it into a comedy, but it is so funny. It is worth watching, the 1988 remake.
Yeah.
Fiend Without a Face, 1958. The Terror from Beyond Space, 1958. And then we've got the honourable mentions. We've got the original Invaders from Mars. This Island Earth, which is a fantastic film. Just go and watch that one if you don't want to watch anything else. That's such a good film. Earth versus the Flying Saucers, 20 Million Miles to Earth, and I Married a Monster from Outer Space.
Fantastic. What a great list.
It's good, isn't it? It's a sort of list that I would happily watch tonight.
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to watch all of them because I will go watch Plan 9, but I could watch any one of those again tonight.
That's really, and let me ask you to finish off as a kind of teaser for what I'm about to cover in the next few weeks. We're moving specifically from looking at a lot of American cinema now over to British sci-fi horror. Do you think there's a difference, Kev? Is there any kind of difference in sensibilities, in themes or anything like that now that we move over to things like Quatermass, Doctor Who and whatever else?
Very much so. If I ever finish the bloody thing, I'm writing a book about British science fiction films. I've been writing it for about, a long time. Let's leave it at that. But it's one day I will finish the damn thing. And there is a very, very British strain of science fiction, which I think it descends directly from H.G. Wells, where I think a lot of the American science fiction descended from the pulp magazines.
Yes.
Which is no bad thing. I don't use pulp as a pejorative term. They were great, the pulp magazines. But that's where they were coming from. I think the British ones, and I do hope American listeners aren't going to be terribly offended, but I think British science fiction tends to be a bit more thoughtful.
Yeah.
A little bit more introspective, perhaps.
Yeah.
I think possibly because we didn't have those same fears and anxieties as the American public did. We certainly did. I mean, you can, if you want to, there's a whole episode to be made on the sort of the loss of empire and British science fiction's reactions to that. That's far too heavy to go into at this point. But if you look at Doctor Who and you look at Star Trek, you can see, without me having to explain anything, you can see the immediate difference between the approaches that the Americans and the British were taking to the genre. We tended to be smaller, perhaps a little bit more inward looking, a bit more psychological. But then, you had people like Nigel Neal who were writing these incredible stories which were teaching everybody a lesson in how to do these things.
Yeah, and have inspired American writers and filmmakers ever since, haven't they?
So, I think you're going to have a lot of fun with the Quatermass films. There's an awful lot to get your teeth into in those films.
Yeah, lots more exciting stuff to come. Fantastic.
Absolutely. Can't wait to hear it.
Well, absolutely. Well, Kev, thank you so much for dropping by again to give us this list of recommendations. Much appreciated.
Always a pleasure. And people, please, honestly, go and watch these films. Let me know. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter, EOFFTV, which is my website. You just look those up in Twitter and Facebook. Come and say hello and come and tell me what you think about these films. Even if you want to just come on and say you're a bloody idiot, they were awful. Come and tell me, because, it's useful to get people's feedback on these films. I don't think you're going to think they're awful. Some of these films are classics. So
no, and actually, my last final question for you was going to be, if you had to just pick one from your list, what would be the one you'd recommend above all the others?
I hate you sometimes. Oh, God. I think it would probably... Today, this second, it would be the day the Earth stood still. Come back and ask me tomorrow, it'll be the thing from another world. Come and ask me in a couple of days, it'll be not of this Earth. But today, this second, it would be the day the Earth stood still. Yeah. Just because I think it's such a clever film that refuses to talk down to me.
Yeah.
And I always appreciate that about a film, that it doesn't try and patronise me. And this certainly doesn't. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, Kev, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. It's been great fun as ever.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to all of my brilliant guests from this week. Kevin Lyons and the co-hosts of the Strong Language and Violent Scenes podcast, Mitch and Andy. Such a treat to finally get those guys on the podcast for the first time. So please do write in. Let us know what you thought of this week's episode and what you think of some of these films we've discussed. Are you a fan of Plan 9 from Outer Space? Do you think it's worse than its reputation suggests? Please do get in touch and let me know. And are there any other big alien sci-fi horror 50s movies from this era that me and Kev missed out or didn't discuss? Drop me some recommendations. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Letterboxd. And if you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners, then join the discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and you can find that on Facebook. If you want to support this podcast and get treated to regular bonus content, then sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. You can find all previous seasons and episodes of the podcast, as well as our merch shop, on our website, evolutionofhorror.com. You can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, Acast, Libsyn, and Spotify. If you get a chance, please do drop us a little rating or review on Apple Podcasts, which really helps us get discovered by new listeners. Okay, well, we are now slowly but surely moving from the 50s into the 60s, and we're going across the Atlantic over to the UK for a bit of British sci-fi horror. Next week, I am going to be joined by the one and only James Swanton, and we are going to be discussing two British horror alien classics, The Quatermass Experiment from 1955 and Village of the Damned from 1960. Cannot wait. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.